Daniel and Ethan started the same job on the very same Monday, earning exactly the same paycheck every month. Both dreamed of one day owning a home, retiring comfortably, and never worrying about money again. Daniel believed financial freedom would come naturally once his income finally became high enough to support it. Ethan believed freedom depended less on income and more on the rules guiding every financial decision. Their first raises arrived together, and both celebrated because years of hard work finally seemed worthwhile. Daniel rewarded himself with a nicer apartment, a newer car, and monthly upgrades that felt completely deserved. Ethan celebrated too, but quietly increased his investments before allowing himself to spend anything additional. Neither decision looked dramatic because both lifestyles still appeared responsible from the outside. Months became years, and both continued receiving raises, while friends assumed their financial lives looked nearly identical. Daniel's paycheck kept growing, yet his bank account never seemed to stay ahead for very long. Ethan's paycheck grew at the same pace, but his savings and investments expanded even faster. Daniel often wondered why earning more never brought the lasting financial relief he expected. Ethan rarely talked about money, but every year his financial choices quietly gave him more freedom. One afternoon they compared finances, expecting only small differences after years of earning identical salaries. Daniel froze when he realized Ethan had built substantial wealth while carrying almost no financial stress. Nothing about their incomes explained the gap, because every paycheck they had ever received was the same. For the first time, Daniel questioned whether an invisible rule had been directing his money all along. Before we continue, welcome to Lion Invests. This channel isn't about getting rich overnight. It's about questioning the financial beliefs that shape how we earn, spend, save, invest, and build wealth. Because what sounds true about money isn't always the full story. If you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology and systems behind financial decisions, consider subscribing. One quick note before we continue. I'm not a financial advisor. I simply enjoy researching financial psychology, behavioral economics, and investing. Everything shared here is for educational purposes to help you think more critically and make more informed financial decisions. Now, let's see what this story is really revealing. Stories like this happen every single day, often without anyone realizing the real reason behind the different outcomes. Maybe you've met two people with similar incomes, but completely different levels of financial freedom. What's fascinating isn't the people themselves, but the invisible rule quietly influencing every financial decision. Most people assume income determines wealth, yet income is only the fuel, not the steering wheel. Imagine two drivers leaving the same city with identical cars and identical amounts of fuel. One follows a map leading toward the destination, while the other unknowingly drives in circles for years. Both consume the same fuel, but only one actually moves closer to where they want to go. Money behaves in surprisingly similar ways because direction often matters more than the amount available. Behavioral economists have studied this pattern for decades across different countries, income levels, and generations. Again and again, they found that financial habits consistently predict long-term outcomes better than temporary income increases. This happens because people quickly adapt to improvements, a psychological pattern called hedonic adaptation. What once felt like a luxury gradually becomes normal, making yesterday's excitement today's expectation. A larger paycheck feels life-changing at first, but your brain rapidly resets its definition of enough. Without noticing, your standard of living quietly expands to match your new level of income. The spending rarely feels reckless because each decision appears small and completely reasonable on its own. A slightly better phone, a slightly nicer apartment, or a slightly more expensive vacation feels harmless individually. The problem isn't any single purchase, but the pattern connecting hundreds of ordinary financial decisions. Psychologists sometimes call this lifestyle inflation, but it begins long before most people recognize its influence. The invisible rule quietly whispers, "Now that you earn more, you should naturally spend more." The real question is whether that rule is helping build your future or quietly borrowing from it. The invisible rule sounds logical because your income has changed, so your lifestyle feels like it should change too. But there's a hidden cost that rarely appears on a receipt or monthly bank statement. Every extra dollar spent today loses the chance to grow into something much larger tomorrow. Economists call this opportunity cost, the value of what you give up by choosing something else. Imagine receiving a $100 raise every month and immediately spending the entire amount. Nothing feels wrong because your bills are paid and your quality of life has improved. Now imagine investing that same $100 instead of permanently increasing your monthly expenses. At first, the difference feels almost invisible because both choices seem equally affordable. 5 years later, the gap begins to widen in ways that surprise most people. 10 years later, the difference no longer comes from income, but from the decisions repeated every month. Compounding rewards, consistency more than intensity, quietly multiplying small actions that rarely seem important today. This is why wealth often grows slowly at first, then appears to accelerate almost without warning. Many people mistake that acceleration for luck when it is usually delayed mathematics finally becoming visible. The opposite pattern also compounds because permanent expenses quietly multiply every future paycheck you receive. Each new payment becomes another obligation, waiting for next month's income before anything else can happen. Eventually, raises stop feeling like progress because they're already committed before they even arrive. This creates the strange feeling of earning more while never feeling financially ahead. The paycheck increased, but the invisible rule increased expectations even faster. When expectations grow at the same speed as income, financial freedom keeps moving farther away. The invisible rule isn't controlling your paycheck. It may be controlling what happens to it the moment it arrives. Here's the surprising part. The invisible rule isn't created by banks, employers, or the economy alone. Much of it exists inside the stories we quietly tell ourselves about what success should look like. We begin believing that earning more should naturally be followed by spending more. Over time, that belief stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like common sense. But common sense isn't always financially wise when it goes completely unquestioned. A different way of thinking begins with one simple question before every financial upgrade. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" ask, "What is this replacing in my future?" That small question shifts your attention from today's excitement to tomorrow's possibilities. Suddenly, money stops being something that disappears and becomes something that quietly builds. This doesn't mean never enjoying your income or avoiding every reward you earn. It means deciding first whether each raise should improve your lifestyle or strengthen your financial foundation. People who build lasting wealth often follow an invisible rule of their own. When income increases, they allow investments, savings, or productive assets to grow before their spending does. Their lifestyle still improves, but it follows their wealth instead of racing ahead of it. Over time, this creates a widening gap between what they earn and what they actually need to spend. That gap becomes flexibility during emergencies, confidence during uncertainty, and freedom when opportunities appear. The remarkable part is that this transformation rarely begins with a higher salary. It begins with replacing one invisible rule with another, one that works quietly in your favor. The rule running your money today is shaping the life you'll experience years from now. So the real question isn't whether you earn enough, but whether your financial rules are taking you where you actually want to go. Once you notice invisible financial rules, you begin seeing them everywhere, not just in your own decisions. You notice advertisements encouraging you to celebrate every raise with another purchase instead of another investment. You notice conversations where success is measured by appearances rather than by financial resilience. You notice how easy it is to compare lifestyles while never comparing balance sheets. Most wealth is invisible because it lives in assets, not in the things people proudly display. That's why financial freedom often looks surprisingly ordinary from the outside. The loudest signs of wealth aren't always evidence of wealth at all. Real wealth usually buys options, flexibility, and time before it buys attention. The invisible rule running your money will eventually shape the choices available to your future self. Every repeated decision quietly casts a vote for the financial life you'll experience years from now. The interesting part is that your future rarely changes because of one dramatic financial decision. It changes because ordinary choices become permanent habits, repeated without much thought. The direction of your money eventually becomes the direction of your life. That's why understanding your financial patterns matters more than memorizing another investing tip. Knowledge changes very little until it becomes a rule you consistently follow. The most powerful financial rules are often the ones no one consciously realizes they're living by. Perhaps the greatest advantage isn't earning more than everyone else. Perhaps it's simply refusing to let invisible habits quietly decide your financial future. The next time money enters your account, pause for a moment before deciding where it goes. Because the life you're building may depend less on your paycheck and more on the invisible rule running it.